why human beings make decisions about how they're going to spend their money. It's very non-rational. And part of the fun is deciphering and figuring out, wow, if it's not rational, what is it?
For many architects, if you just spent some time focusing on creating a unique experience for the client, then you'd be surprised at what a differentiator that is.
Differentiation is important. It's essential. And the more you understand about it, the more you'll be able to consciously use it as a tool to build the practice that helps you be the free architect.
Hello and welcome to the Business of Architecture. I'm your co-host today, Ryan Willard, and I'm joined here by my esteemed colleague and good friend, Mr. Enoch Sears. Enoch, how are you?
Ryan, doing great today. How are you today?
I'm very well, thank you. And we're going to continue the conversation that we started in the last episode about differentiation. And we were making the case for why, we defined what differentiation was in terms of a marketing strategy to make our service stand out from its competitors, put simply. And we were talking about why differentiation is needed as we exist in a very mature market of architects where we're all kind of imitating each other, trying to stand out. And it's very difficult from a client's perspective to be able to tell the difference between different architectural firms. And we were also lamenting some of the sort of false paradigms that might exist with other parts of the building industry.
Resistance.
Yes, the sort of derogatory perceptions that people sometimes have about architects. So we won't focus too much more on those.
No, maybe it's just a couple tangents.
This episode is sponsored by Smart Practice, Business of Architecture's flagship program to help you structure your firm for freedom, fulfillment, and financial profit. If you want access for our free training on how to do this, please visit smartpracticemethod.com. Or if you want to speak directly to one of our advisors about how we might be able to help you, please follow the link in the information. We are looking for architect developer stories for the Business of Architecture podcast. So, are you an architect developer with valuable insights to share? We're always on the lookout for passionate voices in the industry to join us on the Business of Architecture podcast. If you're ready to share your journey, lessons, strategies with our global audience, we'd love to hear from you. Reach out to us to explore being a guest on our show and help inspire other architect developers on their path. We'd be interested in hearing your story, whether you're at the very beginning of your development story or whether you have $100 million portfolio of projects already in the bag completed. We'd like to hear from you if you're working with the developers or that you've developed a number of small houses or you're working at a larger scale.
Although, Ryan, your intro did remind me of an experience I had about 12 years ago when I was practicing as an architect and was asked by our local school board, our school district, to sit on a selection of architects for a big bond that had been passed. And I gotta see this firsthand. It was so interesting how difficult it was for me, even being an architect, to differentiate the different firms because we had to make choices about which firms would be shortlisted to do this work. And I remember as the architects came in and they did their presentations, it just began to seem very similar, very monotonous, very like, well, that's more of the same. This is more of the same. It's all kind of the same talking points, the same. The designs, weren't too radically different. There was some differentiation. I remember there was two guys who came in and they were very elderly and they smelled like an old folks home. And I was like, oh, well, that's one way to differ. I mean, literally, I don't know what it is about an old folks home, but these guys had this smell. I mean, they felt like they were beyond ancient. It was like, wow. So needless to say, they didn't end up getting the job. So don't have bad body odor, I guess, is one thing. Don't smell bad.
They smell like an old person.
Yeah, don't smell like an old person. I mean, you just got to be careful how you smell in general.
No,
right?
For sure.
There was another guy who came in and he was very different. So different can be bad, but this is why different can also be good, right? There's another guy who came in and he was I mean, I liked his approach. He was very confident, and he was very old school. So he just had like a 3-ring binder. I mean, you know, like no PowerPoint, no presentation. Just pulled out his 3-ring binder with his old 35 millimeter or 50 millimeter, processed photos, some of which he'd taken himself. And he's like kind of showing us through the different projects he'd worked on. But where he got it wrong in this case was he was showing us pictures of like, he's like, here's a couple of churches I did, do you see the symmetry here? And then here's a franchise. This is a Taco Bell we did over in the neighboring town. Now, consider we're talking about schools. We're talking about a new middle school that's going to be built, a new building in a high school. So like these are educators. There's there's teachers. There's a principal on the committee, and yeah, that didn't go too well. But the others that were a couple of firms that ended up getting the job, their differentiation was it was enough. Let's just put it that way, was enough. But it was still difficult as I sat there and listened to these different pitches and the way that they presented their practices.
Mm-hmm.
It was difficult to figure out, man, which of these firms is going to be the best firm for the job. And really it came down to which ones seemed different enough. Really, the ones that ended up getting the job were actually the ones that were different enough in the right ways, not in the wrong ways.
It's interesting. I know when I've been running my own firm, and you're in competition with other firms about winning a certain project, and I'd look at the other firm's kind of portfolio or their website, and on many occasions I'd be like, they're really good. Like, how on earth is the client going to tell the difference here? Like, what is going to be the differentiator? And it's interesting because things like in that sort of scenario, and this is what we see a lot with kind of modern procurement, is that it is quite superficial, and people have either been, people have responded to some sort of request for information or whatever it is, or they've been recommended by somebody to go in for a project, and the conversation that we have usually tends to be quite a superficial conversation, and we show portfolio, and then the client kind of makes a decision. They all looks good to them, and then, well, what are they left to make the decision on? Well, the price, perhaps.
There you go. This is one of the main differentiators is price.
And then
that clients end up using.
That's it. That's all they got. That's all they got to go on. They're like, okay, I'm going to go for this person, or perhaps the person they were recommended came from their brother, and they really trust that other person. Okay, so we leverage the relationship through which the referral came through, and that's really what it was the quality of the relationship of the referral partner, as opposed to anything on your part that actually differentiated yourself. Maybe sometimes you might really connect with a particular client, and you both went to the same school or something like that, and that might tip the scale in your favor. But again, it's so sort of tenuous that I wouldn't bank on it.
And one thing I know a lot of firms get frustrated at is when they feel like the selection process is rigged or predetermined.
Mm-hmm.
So for instance, with a lot of, let's say, institutional projects where there's a formal RFP process, it can be very frustrating to try to break into those markets when you feel like there's a clear winner. This client has chosen this firm in the past, or if you are the clear winner, I mean, it's nice for you, but then it's unpleasant when you get unseated from that.
Mm-hmm. So is it even possible then for us to differentiate as architects, is the question?
No, I don't think so. So.
All right.
Yeah.
So thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Good luck.
I mean, charging
marketing.
Cheaper fees, Ryan. Slash your fees. Charge less.
Charge less, do more free work.
Charge less, do more free work.
Yeah. And
certainly a lot of that's what we default to. We say it kind of tongue in cheek here, but that's what untrained architects, when I say untrained, not in architecture, but architects who are not necessarily trained in the arts and skills of negotiation and business and differentiation, might resort to, which is just dropping the fees, charging less, trying to be cheaper, discounting invoices, for instance, even during the midst of a project, instead of sending out what it really took your team to do the project, writing that down, and taking a loss or eating those extra fees as a practice owner.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I mean, lowering your fees is one of the most dangerous ways to differentiate. It is strategically the death knell of a practice to lower fees as a process of differentiation.
Mm-hmm. It's only going to go one way.
And it's going to hurt your firm, because if you end up winning that project, not only do you set a precedent for what you can charge in the future, but you also handicap yourself in the way that you have funds available for your practice to be able to invest in training team members. I mean, let's face it, Ryan, how many practices do you know invest in their employees? Let's just start out with just technically invest in technical training for their employees to increase their ability as architects and their designers.
Those practices, unfortunately, would be in the minority.
Yeah. And if we take those, how many then invest in their team members in the soft skills part of business, which can be even more important than architecture, leadership training, the soft skills of communication, persuasion.
You can't train people that. They're just born with it, aren't they? That's either have it or you don't have it.
High performing companies do train that. That's exactly the point.
You can't.
That's exactly the point.
People just have it or they don't have it, or you just come into the meeting with me and watch how I do it, and then you should be good to go.
That's the typical way that training happens in architecture, for sure, right? So why does more of that training not happen? Well, it's probably one of the last things to come up on the line item when you're planning out the budget, because let's face it, when money's scarce or when money's tight or when we're fighting for the fees we're getting with our clients, it's going to impact your ability to have funds left over to be able to take a lot of money and to put it into training your team members, which is a shame, because a really good training program is something that can keep one of your team members around, help them feel like they have a place to go, make them more useful to you as a business, more valuable as a business owner. So we've established that, reducing fees to differentiate is terrible. It's one of the worst things you can do for your business.
Yeah,
is charge less.
This is not a strategy that we would recommend. And I guess the other thing that we've started to point towards here is that the strategies for differentiation like marketing and positioning is deep. Like, it's really deep. It's a magnificent kind of art of communication, and it's fascinating. And certainly when we get into things like behavioral economics and behavioral psychology and the sort of novelty and the marketing is one of the best funded psychological experiments of the last 100 years. And people know what works, and companies invest huge amounts into marketing. It is the engine of capitalism, and the sales is part and parcel of that. And I really, really want everyone listening to these podcasts to really start to fall in love and pursue marketing and sales with some seriousness, because we have to. It's not even a nice thing to have. Like, it's an essential component of running a firm and running a business. And if all we've got is the kind of pricing strategy, then it's a painful existence. And the architectural industry is a mature industry. It's not an emerging industry, perhaps like it was even 100 years ago. Certainly in terms of its commercial, as a commercial entity, where I think we were talking on a podcast a few weeks back where we were saying, perhaps in the 60s, it was a lot easier just to win work and put a little placard outside and say, architect for hire, come and get your buildings done. And it would just bring in all sorts of wonderful clients for you. Now that is not the case. And there are more and more architects being put out onto the market. There are more and more younger firms that are emerging. Firms can do more with less, so more people are kind of pursuing architecture as a kind of lifestyle vocation in some cases. The solopreneur, you can have a few clients, you can do a lot more with technology, etc. So the industry is not going anywhere. It's just getting more and more mature. So this art, which is well documented and there's a lot of resources of marketing, is more than just a pretty wrapper on your services to make you stand out. It's way more than that. That's the kind of default that I want us to be cautious of, is that we approach marketing as being like, I'm just going to put this pretty wrapper on my services, or I'm going to give it a clever name and the people will come. Or you hire an SEO expert and he gets you to the top of Google or whatever it is. And what we end up seeing when people embark in marketing is that they can often work with a digital marketing company or something like this, and it can be a very expensive tragedy that then puts people off working with marketers ever again. So they end up spending money on something that they didn't really understand what it was, and they'd been led down a particular rabbit hole, and then you're spending $2-3 grand a month on this digital marketer, and there's no results, and then you give up, and then you're like, now we're
Doesn't
worse.
work.
Now we're worse because now we believe that the marketing doesn't work, and it's all just some sort of pseudo scientific nonsense, or or we just kind of get recommitted to, I shouldn't have to market. I'm an architect, for God damn it. Work should just be coming to us. So first of all, just the deep level, my kind of heartfelt plead with the architecture industry is to open our hearts up to the mastery and interest of marketing, because it's such a big, deep topic that's very psychological, and our mastery at it and finding our own voice in it is absolutely essential just to the survival of our businesses.
Yeah, well said. I think that's a great point, Ryan, that marketing it goes much deeper. It's a lot about psychology as much as it is about, like you say, how your firm is presented to the outside.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's so much psychology, the knowledge of the human mind, and what's I've had to learn the hard lesson over many years is that what we logically think is the way that people would act is not the way they actually act.
Mm-hmm.
Right? There was a story that Robert Cialdini told in his book Influence, the Science of Persuasion, which is one of the top marketing books. If you're going to start anywhere, start with that one. But he talks about how there was this shop owner in New Mexico, Santa Fe, New Mexico, and she was selling these little turquoise, kind of handmade Native American jewelry, like really beautiful silver inlaid turquoise stones and gemstones and things like that. And she was heading out of town. So hastily, she scribbled a note on a piece of paper and she put it on top of the jewelry in a particular section of the cabinet. And she headed out to the airport, right? And when she came back, she was shocked to see that entire section was like empty. She's like, wow, what happened? What she'd scribbled on was, like I said, it was a discount, 25% off, 50% off, something like that. She just wanted to move it, right? And so she was asking herself, wow, it looks like that stuff sold really well. And then the employee who was there, who was the manager, she's like, yeah, who would have guessed that if you put that it was twice as much, that it would sell so much more quickly? So the employee had misread the instructions, and instead of being like 50%, I thought it was like 50% more,
Mm-hmm.
that it was actually marked up.
Wow.
And so then people, when they saw that was more expensive, they actually ended up buying it.
Mm-hmm.
And so Cialdini kind of starts off his book giving this example that oftentimes we think that, if something's more expensive, less people are going to buy it. That just seems logically to make sense, right? In this particular anecdote, only one thing changed, and it was the price. The price went up, and it didn't go up slightly, went up significantly.
Mm-hmm.
And these items sold at a velocity much higher, because they'd been sitting there for a long time. And so again, this is like this counterintuitive psychology that happens when we look at buying behavior, when we look at why human beings make decisions about how they're going to spend their money. It's very non-rational. And part of the fun is deciphering and figuring out, wow, if it's not rational, what is it? And how can I start to align the way that I operate, the way that I present my services with the way that people really buy, not with the way I think they buy, but with the way they really make decisions.
It's very interesting, like considering here that, that your pricing is a strategy that falls under marketing, right? And it's a positioning strategy. And so when we go cheap with the price, then we kind of attract more of the kind of clients that we don't want to have. And we also, it communicates something about the service. That's what it does. It communicates something. I mean, it's interesting. Nowadays, sometimes I'm, purchasing something, or I'm looking at, what was I looking at recently? I was looking at a watch or something, and I really liked it. And I saw the price of it, and I was like, oh, that's cheap. A cheap piece of tat. See ya. I just moved away from it. And I've had many experiences like that. There are certain things where you want to spend a lot of money into it, and the kind of the notion that it's going to be it's cheap it's communicating something about it. Well, it can't be that good if it's cheap. So we can, and we've got to be responsible for that when we're selling cheap architectural services, and we're doing it as a profession, that we're subconsciously communicating something about the value of the service if we're selling it and letting it go at that kind of the sorts of prices that are very difficult to run a business from.
And I guarantee that there are architects listening, or designers or landscape architects listening to this episode right now who are saying, I've learned that lesson the hard way. I've seen in my practice that we used to charge this, and we got these kind of clients. And now when we start charging this, we won't go back to that way before, because we know and we can see the benefit and the value when we charge this. And when we let clients know that this is our value and this is what we charge. I guarantee there are people listening to this right now that are being like, they're doing a little here. I know that from experience.
It amazes me, some of our clients here at BOA, certainly some of the ones that work with the ultra high net worth individuals, not only are they dealing with the biggest project budgets, but also the percentages on those construction projects, if they're doing a kind of percentage, are high. They're very high. They're much higher than you'd see in smaller projects. So we're talking 15, 16% in some cases, on a $5 to $10 million project. These are decent, amazing fees coming out. It's expensive. And there's that particular kind of clientele, they're putting a lot of trust into an architect, and the fee needs to communicate the trust. It's not and again, it's not just about presenting the fee and raising the fee, but the fee is part and parcel of a psychological perception of your service. And then there's your skill as a negotiator and a salesperson, and the rest of your kind of marketing collateral and positioning as not a sort of generalist architect, but as someone who's super specialized in a particular niche, and you understand very particular the sorts of pains and problems of this particular demographic. And perhaps, certainly if we use the world of the high-end residential, that you're super skilled at creating a unique experience for a client. I think that's a missing trick. Is actually just, for many architects, if you just spent some time focusing on creating a unique experience for the client, then you'd be surprised at what a differentiator that is. And I mean basic shit, like every Friday, every Friday, email the client, here's where your progress has happened on the project. Or you just develop a communication structure for when they can communicate with you, or you send them a little welcome pack when they sign up with the project, and congratulations, you're now part of this architectural experience and journey. Here's a little project map of the different things that we're going to be expecting, and here's a gift for you, or whatever. Turning it trying to treat it like a hospitality sort of experience, or just basics in terms of communication. Like, what is the soft skills or the conversational quality like? The sort of thing that a hotel, for example, might spend a lot of time training people who are front of house on how to talk with the guests. Like, that sort of caliber of attention, that can be that's a inexpensive way of differentiating your kind of architectural experience, and you can start bringing in elements of novelty and interest here, which again have become a slightly different differentiators to what we might normally do as architects, where we're kind of trying to focus on the awards and the kind of caliber of our education and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, some of these ways that you can differentiate your practice are so simple. They don't require tons of money.
Yeah.
They just require forethought. And, Ryan references, he says, our clients here at BOA, right? So what Ryan is referring to is that Business of Architecture is much more than just a podcast, right? This podcast is a small little sliver of our business, what our business does and what our business helps small practitioners, architectural practices, people with teams of up to 20 to 25 people do is to implement the smart practice method, right? Be able to take these things and actually put them into practice. And I'm going to give you an example. So years and years and years ago, early on, I was consulting with a practice that was, they wanted to improve their practice, and they found that sometimes they were getting a bad rap in the market. They didn't understand why they weren't winning more projects. And on a whim, I called the office up when they were not expecting my call. Okay.
Mystery shopper.
A mystery shopper. One of the easiest things you can do to differentiate your practice is, what is the experience when someone calls your office, right? Because this particular office, it was answered by, like, typically, let's face it, in a lot of small practices, the person who answers the phone is the lowest draftsman on the totem pole because everyone else is busy working, right? A lot of times when you have these smaller practices, 5 to 6 people, sometimes and the principal's out, the phone just rings, someone's got to pick it up. And so there was this young man answer the phone. I don't know, he might have been a designer or something. English was not his first language. And he was definitely like an introvert, I could tell, because there was silence. And then he said, hello. And the hello wasn't even, I wasn't quite sure that he said hello. I was, because of his accent. I was like, and so anyways, long story short, who's answering the phone in your practice? What's the experience that people are getting? Have your team members been trained in simple phone etiquette? Do they know how to make someone feel great when they answer the phone? And typically not, right? Typically, so you'd be, let's go back to my scenario. Let's say that this young man answers the phone, and I ask him, well, hey, yeah, this is Enoch Sears. I'm calling in about the project that we're doing with you guys, and I was just wondering if I could get an update on that. And he might say something like, okay, what project?
So you're miscellaneous foreign person.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I can't even. Yeah. Anyways, that's the point, right? And are you training people, giving them firm etiquette? Making it, because first impressions matter. How the phone is answered matters. So that's a very, very small. It's potentially overlooked.
It's a small one, but I've seen firms do this really well. They've just taken some real care about the client experience, the caliber of communication, and they've kind of put a focus on, we want to make anybody who interacts with our firm feel special. And I mean, there was the guys in New Jersey last year I interviewed on the podcast, Plan Architecture, and they'd actually hired a hospitality consultant who usually works with the Ritz Carlton and the Four Seasons to come in and train all of their team members on how to create a luxury experience through email communication and through phone etiquette. Wonderful.
I love it.
What
That's so brilliant.
so simple.
Simple. Yep.
But a real sort of nice kind of differentiator.
Well, here's the other thing too, Ryan. Like, if we're talking about, a lot of times we talk about working on the business or investing in your business, like this is what we're talking about. That's what it looks like to invest in your business. You're not investing in upgrading people's skill level when it comes to waterproofing details. You're not, investing in Revit training or helping them get up to speed with Vectorworks or ArchiCAD. All those are definitely necessary, but you're investing in your people and training them hospitality, training them etiquette, how to deal with clients, soft skills, to provide a great experience for clients, because it's a service-based business.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you can have some fun with this, right? They can, I like some of the marketing exploits of someone like Elon Musk, right?
Oh my goodness,
He's brilliant in terms of the element of novelty that he brings to his products to make them stand out. So, for example, the Cybertruck. I mean, I'm not even going to talk about the sort of the design of it necessarily, but let's just look at something like the bulletproof glass. Like,
I didn't realize that, Ryan. It has bulletproof glass.
I believe so. Yeah,
Okay.
a bulletproof windshield. A completely pointless. You don't need bulletproof glass, but it's cool.
You don't, Ryan. You don't.
Not yet. Not yet. But that's one of those things. Rather than talking about, say, the specifications of the engine and the wheel tread and all these kinds of technical details, which might be in this kind of talking about architecture firms, that might be akin to, all of our additional qualifications and expertise that we have in LEED certification and, sustainability and various types of, I don't know, whatever other sorts of engineering capabilities that we might have, like energy performance, etc. The idea that you could walk away with a car that's got bulletproof glass, it's a very novel thing that has people talking about it.
The buzz.
It's a buzz. It's cool.
The buzz.
It's like it's interesting. Or again, it's the same thing with the other Teslas, is the idea that the Teslas have this kind of dance mode. There's things that you can press and the car does, its wings raise up, the doors raise up, and it kind of flashes lights and it does a little dance. Again, pointless, but novel, and an easy win that in terms of kind of marketing is quite, it's fun. It gets people talking. I know I had Rory Sutherland on the podcast years ago. So Rory is at the time, I think he was the vice president or the president of Ogilvy, the advertising company, and very sort of fiercely intelligent guy, and just a wealth of extraordinary knowledge to do with all of the counterintuitive ideas around marketing and kind of the human psychology that kind of why these things might work. And he was talking about the difference between a train journey. Okay, so you've got a train journey that's 3 hours long, and people are complaining about the time and how long it takes. And one strategy would be for a train company to, invest a lot of money in improving the carriages and improving the engines on the trains and widen the tracks and, get faster trains out there. A very expensive endeavor. Or I think his suggestion was, have young, scantily clad ladies and men serving you drinks and food on the journey, and everybody wants
an experience.
Everybody wants to sit around for another half hour. Or in that scenario, like things like Wi-Fi and that kind of stuff become part of the kind of experience of the journey, which shifts.
I think that's a great example, Ryan, bringing it back to like differentiation of, if we consider that architectural practice might not be too different metaphorically from a a train, something that's highly sophisticated, something that's been around for a very long time, something that may be difficult to differentiate because it gets you from point A to point B. But I love that you brought in that example from Roy Sutherland about like, okay, a firm could spend a lot of money, a lot of energy, a lot of resources trying to really fine tune their product management system, right? To get the products done a little bit more quickly with a little bit less change orders, right? Maybe really up level the caliber of people that they hire, spend a lot more on training them, spend a lot more on QA, and all those things could be very valuable. But if we're just looking at differentiation, right? If we're just looking at how to bring more money into the practice so that we can fund these type of improvements, if we're looking at how can we win more products, how can we get a better word out about the work that we do, more positive publicity.
Mhm.
Investing in something like experience it's the low-hanging fruit. It's one of the low-hanging fruit.
Yeah.
The actual
No.
experience someone has, like they're on the train.
Yeah, absolutely. And I like this because again, this is an easy entry point into the kind of broader, bigger world of marketing, and just kind of starting to think about what is the experience that the client has working with you outside of your main service. Like we have to, as architects, just okay. Look, we're all producing brilliant architecture. Okay, great. Okay, what's the things that are often missing in architecture businesses is the client experience and the client care, and it's an easy win and an easy differentiator. And that's where I would start. We can talk. I mean, this is probably a scope for another episode, but the pyramid that we often cite of the difference, the kind of perception of value, where at the bottom run of the pyramid we've got being perceived as a salesperson. Okay, we don't want to be perceived as a salesperson. People's defenses go up. It's not good. Then above that, we've got the generalist architect. Okay, so it's very difficult for a consumer to be able to see what it is that you do. They jump onto your website, they see hotels, they see backyard extensions, they see random but beautiful little objects that you've designed for your home. That's quite a common one with architects, is that we'll jump on a website and we'll see just random architectural projects which are very beautiful, but they make no sense to a consumer, and you're not left with any kind of confidence in this service. So you just look at it and you're just like, okay, well, it's generalist. Above the generalist, we've got the specialist. Okay, great. We've got an architect who specializes in beachfront property in Costa Mesa, for example, or in heritage buildings in Sevenoaks outside of London. And they've got a kind of, okay, all right. So now we're starting to build up some expertise around being a specialist. And above that specialist, we've got the notion of the expert. So perhaps now you're starting to really dig into your expertise, and you're being public about it. You've got these symbols of status of expertise. Perhaps you've published a book on the refurbishments of Tudor homes for modern renovations in Sevenoaks, for example, or whatever else kind of specialism you can think of. But you're the one who's written the book, or you've been on 100 podcasts, or you've got your own podcast, for example, or being published and being visible. So you're starting to be seen as the expert. And then at the top of that kind of pyramid or triangle is this idea of the celebrity, which is kind of superstar fame and notoriety. And in our culture, our Western culture, it's quite interesting because you can have celebrity in and of itself can be used to sell a product which has nothing to do with what you're famous for. And we see this across the board with advertising of, actors selling perfume, or Michael Jackson being used by Pepsi to sell Pepsi. There is
Wheaties, man. I'm still traumatized, man, from seeing Michael Jordan promote the Wheaties cereal. Have you ever eaten Wheaties, Ryan? Do they have those in the UK? And when I was a kid, I was like, those has got to be the best cereal ever, man. I want to get myself some Wheaties. It's got Andre Agassi's on the front of them. There's Michael Jordan. Nothing to do with basketball. Nothing to do with
I
tennis,
didn't know
and
he did that.
rather
That's
terrible tasting cereal.
well, it's interesting that it kind of makes sense. You can see the reason, Michael Jordan being associated with trainers. There's a very clear link with they were the trainers he was wearing, etc., etc. But then the fact that it still works for him to be selling cereal, or Michael Jackson is selling Pepsi, is because people have this very strong emotional connection with the individual, and then that just being associated with your product kind of instantly transforms your experience of that product. Like, it happens kind of quite quickly and subconsciously, and there's a lot of psychology that's happening that's happening there. But again, that kind of that sort of hierarchy of differentiation, I think, is quite important for us to sort of consider when we're looking at this, and also to start being a bit courageous in terms of, why not try designing a website which is really totally client focused, and maybe you have a different way of communicating with the people in your office. You have your own kind of beautiful portfolio book which is for the office, and you look through it and you have that. Or maybe you have these kind of marketing funnels which are specifically designed for a particular type of client, and you're using their language. You understand about their pains and problems. And again, this idea of differentiation in terms of being able to understand and speak the language of your demographic, of your target client, again, super, super important. And we've spoken a lot here on the podcast in the past about kind of the sophistication that we see some, kind of very successful architects approaching their clients. They've got a good understanding of, say, the business world that their commercial clients are operating in. They understand how a developer is organizing debt and finance for a project, which gives that architect the capacity to be able to have a conversation about it and position their services in relation to the pains that come from that particular financial mechanism that the developer is dealing with. That just being able to speak the language of business, being a good business person, I think, is probably the best differentiator and that we can ask of architects. Get interested in business, talk like a business person with your clients, be they residential or commercial, and you don't sound like another architect.
Clients will absolutely appreciate it, right? They will appreciate it, especially if you are in a business to business scenario where you're serving non-residential clients, you're working with businesses, you're working with institutions. Yeah, just understanding business and being able to talk that language. Like, Ryan, I went over a couple weeks ago, I was in Phoenix and I was talking with my friend Chris Walton, and he's a developer, smaller, so on the small side. They're trying to close a project right now. I think it's like I don't know, it's a $90 million apartment complex they're trying to close. But as he was talking with me, it was just like he was talking about, just how challenging it is to like put together these deals and, getting these projects under contract, rounding up the funding for these projects. Does he go to institutional funding? Does he go to family and friends? Is he using hard money? What does he come up with the package to put together to actually acquire this project? Can he do it in the right amount of time? Do they have to extend the contract to actually get the funds together? What are going to be the returns that he's promised to his investors and people who are investing in these projects? And like, as an architect, if you can come in there and have that conversation to understand what your clients are going through and what they have to deal with and the stresses that they're dealing with, it's just going to be so much easier for them to trust you, for them to see you as a valued business partner, a valued asset to help them achieve their goals.
Yeah, I think this is a really, again, it's a really simple win, is understanding what the goals of the client are outside of just the architectural goals, okay? Because sometimes the architectural goals, they end up putting us in a box of what we're actually doing. But if you're approaching it as, you're helping this business make more money, you're helping this business grow and expand, and you can have a conversation like that. And also that you see yourself as an advocate or an ally to your client and to their industry and their business, great. You can have a very different conversation with somebody, and it opens up a lot more kind of avenues, and it can position yourself higher up the food chain, if you like. I interviewed an architect a few years ago here in New York, and his marketing strategy was very simple. He went to the trade shows of, I believe it was a lot of, he was working with a particular kind of retail developer. And he used to go to the trade shows of these developers every year and spend a little bit of money on some of their conferences, not necessarily to speak at, but just to gain intelligence, to gain intel. And he was like, I always spend some time just understanding as much as we can about their industry, what they're dealing with, what their pains are, what their problems are, what the fluctuations are, what the changes are, what the challenges are. And I can always start a conversation with somebody about that before we get anywhere near talking about architecture. And it was a great differentiator.
So there we go. I mean, this conversation about differentiation, we could carry it on for the next hour, 2 hours. But what we want you to take away from this episode and the previous episode is look into differentiation, right? As you're looking at ways in which you can capture higher fees, which will ultimately bring more abundance into your practice, which will empower you, which will give you agency. Differentiation is important. It's essential. And the more you understand about it, the more you'll be able to consciously use it as a tool to build the practice that helps you be the free architect.
Hey, Enoch Sears here, and I have a request. Since you are a listener here of the Business of Architecture podcast, Ryan and I, we love putting this podcast together. We love sharing information as much as we can glean from all the other industries that we're a part of to bring it back to empower you as an architect and a designer. And one thing that helps us in our mission is the growth of this podcast, simply because it helps other architects stand for more of their value, spreads the business information that we're sharing to empower architects together so architects, designers, engineers can really step into their greatness, whatever that looks like for each individual. And so here my simple ask is for you to join us and be part of our community by doing the following: heading over to iTunes and leaving a review of the podcast. And as an expression of our sincere thanks, we would like to give you a free CEU course that can get you one professional development unit, but more importantly, will give you a very solid and firm foundation on your journey to becoming a profitable and thriving architect. So here's the process for that. After you leave us a review, send an email to support@businessofarchitecture.com. Let us know the username that you use to leave the review, and we will send you that free training. On the training, you'll discover what 99% of architecture firm owners wish they would have known 20 years ago.
Hello, listeners. We hope you're enjoying our show. We love bringing you these insightful conversations, but we couldn't do it without the support of our amazing sponsors. If you're a business owner or know someone who would be an excellent fit for our audience, we'd love to hear from you. Partnering with us means your brand will reach over 40,000 engaged listeners each month. Interested in becoming a sponsor? Please send us an email at support@businessofarchitecture.com. The views expressed on this show by my guests do not represent those of the host, and I make no representation, promise, guarantee, pledge, warranty, contract, bond, or commitment except to help you be unstoppable.